Good morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyah b'dvaro. There's a teaching that says, Yesh shivim panim laTorah. There are 70 faces, 70 levels of interpretation of the Torah. Which means that any Torah passage, any Torah concept, any Torah law could be studied and understood in many different ways. There's no one way to understand something. In fact, the Mishnah teaches us, hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba. Dig deep, turn it over, because the more you dig deeper, the more you will uncover endless layers and levels of interpretations and understanding of the Torah. The Torah is the wisdom of God, the infinite wisdom of God, so there is no limit to the amount of depth that one can get into and extrapolate from the wisdom of the Torah. Which, by the way, explains something really important and really beautiful. You know, every week of the year, we study a particular Torah portion for that week. The Torah is divided into portions for every week of the year. Once a year at Simchat Torah, we make a grand celebration. We complete the whole Torah. And the very next thing we do is we go back to the beginning and we start studying the Torah portions again. And sometimes people ask, we studied this last year. Why do we have to study it again? Or sometimes we're studying a particular tractate of the Talmud or whatever, and somebody says, I studied it already. Why do I have to study it again? Now, of course, just because you studied something once or twice, I mean, you could forget things, and it's important to know it, so you should always be reviewing that which you studied. That's obvious with Torah or with anything that we study. But more importantly, especially with the Torah, is that there's so many layers of depth that you can get to with deeper understanding and deeper interpretations of that which you studied. So even if you studied it once in a certain way, you could study it again in a different way, in a deeper way, and you'll see a whole different light than you saw the previous time. So every time we're studying the same Torah portion that we did last year and the previous years, but this time it could be very different. In fact, it's even more than that. The Torah portion this year may be the same as last year and previous years, but you know what's different? You're a different person than you were previous years. All of the experiences of life have shaped you, have conditioned you always to be changing. You see things differently, you feel differently about yourself, you've gained new skills, new experiences. So automatically, if you're a different person this year than last year, when you approach a text, when you study something, you'll be seeing it, you'll be understanding it differently. So that's a general important concept, how there's endless ways to understand and study Torah. More specifically, as we have discussed earlier, there are 4 general genres, 4 general levels of the Torah in terms of depth. And that is called the Pardes, the orchard of the Torah. And what we're going to do today in chapter 10 and 11 is take a tour, take a stroll through the orchard, the garden of Torah. Which means we're going to explore the 4 levels of the Torah. They are Pshat, the simple meaning, Remez, the allusion, the hint, Drush, the homiletical lesson, and the Sod, the mystical component. We're going to stroll through them, discover how they can interpret something, each in a different, deeper way, one deeper than the previous one. And then we're going to study the 5th level, the level of CHASSIDUT, the new infinite light of the Torah. And the topic that we are discussing, as we mentioned at the end of last class, is Modeh Ani. We're going to focus on that really important and beautiful prayer, first thing we say in the morning, and that is Modeh Ani. So how does the prayer go? You probably know it by heart. Modeh Ani lefanecha, I am thankful to you, Melech Chai v'Kayam, the living and eternal King, Shechazarta bi nishmati bechemla, you have restored my soul back in me with great mercy. Rabba emunatecha, my faith in you is great. It's a gratitude prayer, an acknowledgement prayer that we make first thing in the morning. What is the concept, the explanation behind this prayer, which is what we're going to be exploring today? And I want to point out 2 strange things about this prayer. The first is the actual format of the prayer itself, and the second is the timing and the setting of the prayer. So in terms of the format of the prayer, it's very different than any other prayers or blessings that we make. It's very informal. Normally, a blessing has a formal formula to it. Liturgy has a formula and a structure to it. So, for example, blessings are always in the context, in the formulation of Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord, King of the universe. And whether we make those words at the beginning of the blessing or the end of the blessing, or sometimes both, this prayer or blessing of Modeh Ani makes no mention of Baruch Atah Hashem. It doesn't even mention God's name. There's no mention of God's name in this prayer, which makes it so unique or so strange. All we do is we refer to King of the universe, so that's a description about God, but we're not actually saying God's name. Why is that? And the second strange thing about this prayer is the timing and the setting. We know that to pray to God, to study Torah, to recite holy sacred words, you have to be in a state ready for it. You have to be cleaned up, you have to be dressed appropriately, you have to be washed up, you have to be purified. We wash every morning, and we wash our hands, we rinse our mouth, we wash ourselves up, and we put ourselves in a posture and in a state where we're ready to communicate with the Lord. The Modeh Ani prayer, we're still in bed, we're in pajamas, we haven't washed ourselves up, we haven't washed our hands or our mouths, we're groggy, we're tired, we're not dressed up at all. It's a really informal setting, seemingly even a disrespectful setting, and yet we're saying the prayer to God. Why is that? So to address these strange things about the prayer and about the theme of the prayer in general, let's now begin the stroll through the orchard, the pardes of the Torah. First, let's explore the pshat, the simple meaning of the prayer. The simple meaning of this prayer is that it's a prayer of gratitude. And we learn from here the importance of always giving gratitude to anybody who ever does something nice and good to us. And now it's God. And what is God doing? He's restoring our soul back into us. We were sleeping earlier, and now all of a sudden we've awoken and been given the chance to live another day. So we say, thank you, Hashem. Now, what's interesting and unique about this gratitude prayer is that it's a very informal gratitude prayer, as we mentioned. In fact, once we get up, dress, wash ourselves, and begin prayers for the day, there's going to be a whole section of those prayers called the morning blessings, Thanksgiving blessings. And there's an actual formal blessing that is pretty similar and identical to the Modeh Ani prayer. It's called Elokai Neshama. Dear God, this soul which you have restored back into me with great mercy, I give you thanks. So we're going to be making, with the formula of Baruch Atah Hashem, we're going to be doing this blessing later in a more formal, respectful state. So are we making seemingly the same blessing and prayer now, right away, when we wake up, in a disrespectful state? So the answer is that blessings are supposed to be made before we experience and derive pleasure, right? If you're a blessing on a food, if you're about to eat an apple or drink the coffee or the tea, we don't drink it first and later thank God or bless God. You first make a blessing and then you eat or drink. Making that blessing is the initial and important awareness of thank you, of gratitude to Hashem for giving me this, and now I'm going to derive benefit from it. So the same thing is, we're supposed to be thanking Hashem before the experience of waking up, which is impossible. When you're still sleeping, you can't make the prayer. But second best, at the very least, the moment you wake up, right away, make that prayer. It's at the beginning of the experience of the benefit of waking up. So later, you'll be in a position to make a more formal prayer, but there's something about immediately. You know, when someone does you a favor, yeah? So you're thinking about how to thank them. And on the one hand, you say, let me settle, compose myself. Let me buy a beautiful card. Let me prepare a really nice email. And let me send a true, eloquent expression of gratitude from my heart. I want to work on it, give me some time. And that's a beautiful thing, and you should always be doing that. But that does not replace another really important gesture of gratitude. And that is when someone gives you something or does something for you without their formality, without preparation, just instinctually and initially, immediately react with thanks. A big hug, a big yasher koach. Thank you very much. But it's not as nice as I want to do it. I want to prepare something more beautiful. Okay, That's important. Do that later. But right away, give an expression of thanks. And that's the expression of thanks we give to God with Modeh Ani first thing in the morning. Now, because it's in this informal setting, and we haven't yet dressed ourselves and purified ourselves and washed our hands and rinsed our mouth, we are limited. We cannot say God's name, right? So therefore, God's name is not in the prayer. That's the reason for the informality. But at least it gives us the opportunity to make a kind of prayer. It's not a holy or a sacred prayer that we'd have to be all dressed up to make, but we can make this unholy or this non-formal prayer as soon as we wake up. That is the simple meaning. That's the pshat. Now you understand the basic meaning of why we're making this prayer, why it's a short prayer, why it's an informal prayer, why we're doing it in the setting of where we are. That explains Modeh Ani. Let's go deeper. The next level is the remez, is the hint, the illusion. What's this hinting to over here? So here we're going to be thinking about a very profound idea, a very bold, big Jewish idea. The Modeh Ani prayer, when we say that in the morning, is a reminder about the Jewish concept of Tchiyat HaMetim, of resurrection of the dead. The Torah tells us, the prophets tell us, that Jews believe there will come a time when the dead will be resurrected, and that is in the Messianic age after Mashiach comes in the time of redemption. That's what we believe in. Now, can we have any understanding, any experience of that today? Well, really much not. Nobody can bring the dead back to life, unfortunately. But the Talmud tells us that when we fall asleep, it is a taste of death, 1/60th of death. Because sleep, spiritually, is that a portion of our soul is leaving us and going back to the heavens to be recharged, to be rejuvenated for the next day. So we're not dead when we're sleeping, thank God, but we are much less alive, right? Our awareness and many parts of our system sort of shut down when we're sleeping. So it's a taste of death. And therefore, awakening in the morning is a taste of resurrection of the dead. All of those parts of ourselves which switched off are now turned back on. And when that happens, we should use that as an opportunity every morning to remind ourselves about this prophecy, about this promise, about this basic Jewish tenet of faith. And therefore, in the morning, besides just thanking ourselves for thanking Hashem for waking up in the morning, we also say, Rabba emunatecha, my faith in you is great. What does that mean? The simple meaning was, I'm really thankful to you. Thank you so much. The deeper, the remez, the hint over here is that my faith in you has been strengthened. It's my faith in the basic tenet of Jewish faith, in the resurrection of the dead. That might be something that we have a hard time understanding, comprehending, a hard time believing in, but awakening in the morning should give us an additional strengthening of that faith in God. And that's a kavanah, an intention you should be having every morning when you wake up. Now, let's go deeper. Drush, the deeper level of Torah, is the homiletical, allegorical lessons that we can take away from something. What can we practically take away and enhance our lives from the Modeh Ani prayer? It's like this. We turn to God and we say, thank you so much for restoring the soul back into me. Now, on the one hand, yeah, sure. It's when the piece of our soul that left us during the night when we were sleeping, is it possible that God would not restore it back into us? Sadly, there are people that don't wake up in the morning, heaven forbid. So yeah, it's possible. But let's think deeper. I mean, why would God be tempted to do that, and therefore we're thanking him for not doing that? Because we have deposited this gift, this piece of ourselves, in God's hands during the night. And now we're expecting the next morning, God, give it back to me. Now, it's possible, or it's plausible, that we can consider that God may say, you know what, I'm not giving it back to you. Why? Because you owe me. And until you pay your debt to me, I'm not giving this back to you. Or I think of the following example. Let's say I borrow money from you, and I give you a collateral. I deposit something in your, to secure the loan. And a few weeks later, I come to you and I say, hey, can you give me that watch back? Can you give me that collateral back? And you say, well, listen, Sure, but first you owe me something. You borrowed money from me. Pay me the money back and I'll give you the collateral back. So similarly, our life is very imperfect. We're not fulfilling all of our duties, all of our responsibilities that we should be doing and sort of owe to God. We're falling short. We could be living so much better, so much higher. So we have this debt to God. And God may say, well, I'm waiting for you, right? You're not living up to your part of the deal. You do a little better. You give me what you owe me, and then I'll give back to you the collateral that you gave to me, which was the piece of your soul. God could have said that, but does not do that. And that is our intense arousal of gratitude in the morning, saying to God, I know that you maybe have had a legitimate argument not to restore the soul back into me, yet nonetheless, out of your great compassion, you did. And I thank you very much. And what we can learn from that is compassion. How often does somebody want something from us, need something from us, ask us for a favor, want some time about time, and we may have all these calculations in our head. You're not deserving. You're always asking me. You're never giving anything to me. I've given you so much. You've never responded. You've never reciprocated. You owe me. I don't owe you. And we can make all these calculations why somebody is so undeserving of our time, of the things that they're asking for. Or we could say, it's true. You're always needing more from me than I need from you. It's true you've never reciprocated. It's true that you're undeserving. But nonetheless, I learned from God. God always gives, even when it's undeserving. And we can learn that lesson when we say, Modeh Ani, today I will pledge to be giving, to be forgiving, to be generous, and to be kind, not only when it makes sense, but even when it's undeserving. There's a beautiful story in this week's Torah portion, which is Balak. There was once a great tzaddik, a great Rebbe. His name was the Apter Rav, Reb Avram Yeshua Heschel, who lived 200 plus years ago, in the student of the Maggid of Mezrich in the times of the Alter Rebbe. And one of the things he was known for was to be an incredible Ohev Yisrael. He was a lover of Jewish people, a lover of all people. Every sermon, every drasha, every teaching, he emphasized and highlighted the importance of loving everybody. Well, once it was the week of Balak, that Torah portion, and the students came to him and they said, Rebbe, no, you have a teaching of Ahavat Yisrael from this week's Torah portion? He said, this week, it's the easiest portion to interpret. How so? Just look at the name of the portion, Balak. Balak, Bet Lamed Kuf. That stands for the mitzvah of the Torah, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have to love everybody like you love yourself. That's it. The acronym is there. That's the teaching in the Torah portion. Students thought this is some kind of joke. This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't add up. Ve'ahavta is a vav. Balak is a vet or a bet, a different letter. Kamocha in the verse is a kaf. In the word balak, it's a kuf. The letters are very different. It's a cute word game, but it doesn't really add up. It doesn't make any sense because the letters don't match. Rebbe, what are you talking about? So the Rebbe answered, yeah, that exactly is the teaching. This, that there's a mitzvah to love other people, is not only when it makes sense, when it feels like it's justified. It's even or especially when it does not make sense. It doesn't add up, and you feel that the person is undeserving, and there's something in you that says, I should not be gracious and favorable to you, and nonetheless you overcome that and you behave compassionate. That is the essence of the teaching of loving other people. So that's a reflection, that's a meditation that we have on the Drush level of Modeh Ani. Finally, let's go to the deepest of levels, the Sod, the mystical level. And here is a Kabbalistic mystical teaching, which now is not a Kabbalah class, so we're not going to get into it at great depth, but at least you should be aware. Because remember, what is Kabbalah? Kabbalah mainly is a spiritual roadmap of the universe, where we explore divine, sphirot, attributes, traits, worlds, angels, all kinds of heavenly and angelic beings in cosmos, and that sort of maps out God's universe for us. So the Kabbalah says as follows. We're not mentioning God's name in Modeh Ani, but we're referring to God as Melech Chai V'Kayam, the living and eternal King. What's the Kabbalah behind that? Melech, king, refers to one of the 10 Sefirot, which is Malchut. Malchut being the lowest of the 10 Sefirot. There are 10 Sefirot, 3 intellectual, cerebral Sefirot, Chachma, Bina, Dat, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, loosely translated. Then 6 emotional Sefirot, kindness, discipline, harmony, compassion, mercy, strength, empathy, right? Different kinds. And then there's at the bottom is Malchut. Malchut doesn't have an exact persona of its own. Malchut is the recipient of all of the flow, all of the decisions, all of the manifestations of the higher Sefirot, and then Malchut executes. So Malchut is the executional part of God, which went ahead and created worlds. Or within ourselves, Malchut is that part which executes all of our wisdom, all of our knowledge, all of our thoughts, and all of our feelings and reactions and opinions, and now executes it in a way of, through our mouths or through our hands, what are we going to do? What's the decision? Sometimes Malchut is referred to as peh, as a mouth. It's the executional part of ourselves. And it takes lesson from all of the higher inner attributes within us. Chai v'kayam, the living and eternal God. Chai v'kayam refers to the next sphere up, which is the sphere of Sod. Sod literally means foundation, or it also means the bonding. Sod is a very important component in the execution of Malchut, because you can execute and do something in one of two ways. You can do it, right? We've already learned that Malchut is the mouthpiece or is the executional piece, and it doesn't have its own identity. It takes its energy or its directions from all the Sefirot above, which is a really important idea. Your mouth and your hands and your feet and your body should not have a mind of their own. Rather, it should always be learning from your mind and your heart. Sometimes it's a loose mouth. The mouth just says things without thinking. Never do that. Never behave without thinking. Always be sure that it's shaped by and guided by our minds and our hearts. Now, when we execute, I want to do something, I want to give something, I want to teach something. You could do it with the bonding or without the bonding. When a stranger is teaching something to my child, they may be imparting the knowledge or training in a particular skill, but there may not be the bond. Versus if I am reaching out to my child, teaching or training them, hopefully, there's the bond. There's the bond of father to child. There's the bond of interest, the bond of love. That execution of Malchut that is triggered by or inspired by the bond of Yesod will be so much more deeper and more meaningful. So Yesod teaches us how in all of our activities and behaviors and interactions with others, it should be spirited by a deep bond and a deep desire to connect with and impart to the other. That is the sphere of Malchut and the sphere of Sod, and therefore we're saying that when God restores my soul back into me, when he creates the universe and creates me and gives me my soul, he's doing it through the sphere of Malchus, which is inspired by the bond and the love and the commitment of Sod, and that is how my soul arrives into me. That is the Kabbalistic explanation of the prayer. And we're going to leave it at that. So, how beautiful, how enjoyable. We've just taken a tour through the orchard of Torah and discussed and discovered the 4 layers about Modeh Ani. The simple meaning that it's a instinctual, informal gratitude prayer, not saying God's name. The remez, the hint, it's reminding us, we're strengthening our faith in Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection of the dead. The drush, it's teaching us how to practice compassion, even when somebody's undeserving. And the sod, the mystical component of the spiritual pathway, how the soul arrived to us was through the sphere of Malchut with the strengthening of the bond of Sod. So there's this loving attachment of God to us. Now, let's get into the highest level of Torah, the CHASSIDUT, Yechida. How does the essence of Torah interpret and explain to us the prayer of Modeh Ani? And we're going to study that today. And then, as we've discussed earlier, once we discover the essential light, the essential meaning, the essential identity behind something, that will radiate and influence all of the other interpretations as well. That we're going to discover in future classes. But for now, let's just explore briefly the essential meaning of the prayer of Modeh Ani. And it goes like this. When we say Modeh Ani, we wake up in the morning and thank Hashem, what we are doing is we are expressing the most deepest essential part of ourselves and our soul. We are tapping into that which makes us us, and we are reaching out to the most deepest essential level of the essence of God. That is the experience of Modeh Ani, my essence to your essence. Therefore, let's think about this. How is that practiced? Right? What are we being grateful for? I'm not being grateful for my home, my family, my job, my health. No. I'm being grateful for the essence of who I am, for my life itself. And it's coming from my essence, this level of gratitude, and it's touching God's essence. This adds new meaning why we don't mention God's name in the prayer. Whereas earlier we said that we cannot mention God's name in the prayer because we're not yet purified and dressed appropriately to mention God's name. Now we're understanding it very differently. We're not mentioning God's name in the prayer because it's inappropriate to mention God's name, because this prayer is much higher than any name of God. God has many names. God has 7 names, 7 holy names, as the Talmud tells us. Hashem, Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, Elokim, Kel, Rachamim. There's many names of God which you're not allowed to just recite in vain, and you're not allowed to erase them. But a name ultimately cannot be descriptive of an essence. Right? I have a name, you have a name. But are you your name? Your name is a way of people associating with you. And you may have different names or nicknames or descriptive names which describe different things about you. So all of your names will tell people more about you and your character. But your essence does not have a name. In a sense, if you lived on your own without anybody needing to call you, do you need a name? You don't need a name. A name is for an association, for others. Describe yourself in its truest essential form. It doesn't have a name. A name is limiting, and the essence cannot have that description of a name. So God's essence does not have a name. It's just reaching out to you. When I say you, I'm almost reaching a part of you deeper than any name. Let's say you turn to your loved one and you want to tell her how much you love him or her. So if I love, and you say the name, or you give her a nickname or a characteristic, that's a very endearing expression. But the deepest expression is to say, I love you. Who's this you? Just you. You and everything about you. Not a piece of you, not a part of you, not a trait of you, but you in your essence. I just connect and accept all of you. So Modeh Ani is reaching out to the essence of God from our essence. Therefore, there's no mention of God's name. Therefore, we recite this prayer even before we've washed our hands, purified ourselves, rinsed our mouths, and dressed appropriately. Not because technically we're still in bed, we want to make an instinctual, immediate prayer, and this is the way we do it. It's the other way around. It's by design that we make this prayer in this state. When is being in this state, still in bed, not having washed our hands, that's a kind of state of impurity, as we have learned, where when you're sleeping and a piece of your soul leaves you and you're a partial 1/60th death, that's a kind of impurity that rests upon us. When we wake up in the morning, we have to purify ourselves by washing our hands and washing ourselves up. Impurity can affect layers and levels and parts of you, but impurity cannot taint your essence. The essence of a person can never become sullied, tainted, or impure. The essence of a Jew always remains whole. It's this indestructible part of yourself. We call it the Modeh Ani component. It's almost like the Jewish spark, the Yiddish neshama. Right? That essence, that core, is something about you that can never become impure, that can never become destroyed, that can never be tainted, that can never be ruined. Other parts of you can. Right? There's a kind of important psychological lesson from here and a spiritual lesson from here. Psychologically, all kinds of experiences of life and traumas of life can harm, can damage, can taint all parts of ourselves, right? And we fall into depressions and states of trauma, and we're affected in many, many ways, and we have to go through all kinds of important therapies and work on ourselves to restore and to fix those parts of ourselves that have been injured. But there's one part of you that can never be injured, and that is the essential you, which is what gives so much hope and gives you the ability to succeed in repairing all the other parts of you. Because if your most inner self is always whole and complete and healthy, that's where you derive the strength. And that's where you derive the ability to be able to rehabilitate every other part of yourself. Therefore, we believe that nobody is ever too far gone. Everybody can be healed, no matter what they've been through. And the same thing spiritually. Yes, through various violations of sin and through various unhealthy behaviors, spiritually unhealthy behaviors, we can become detached from God, detached from our life force. There could be some spiritual blockages in our system which affect us. True, and they need to be healed. But there's one part of us that can never become separated from God. One part of us that can never lose its spirit, and that is the essential soul. Like in those, once upon a time, those perhaps the gas stovetops, right, where there's always a pilot light that's burning. So the actual stovetop can be on, can be off, can be higher, can be lower, but one thing never gets extinguished. Even if the stovetops are turned off, the pilot light is always on. And that gives the power to trigger and to illuminate and to kindle all the other stovetops. There's a pilot light within ourselves, and that's the Modeh Ani. That's the part of ourselves that we're connecting with and identifying first thing we wake up in the morning. Therefore, we're not needing to wash our hands. We're not needing to purify ourselves, because that part of us never became impure. That part of us never became detached. It's always whole. And at that moment, first thing in the day, if we can uncover that, we can experience that, we can express that, and that level connects deeply and immediately, directly to the essence of God, that is the most powerful bonding experience we can have in the morning. That's what we would call the truest Modeh Ani experience. That's the essential explanation of Modeh Ani. Wow. Imagine if you could experience that every morning. You'd have a lot of clarity in life. It would change the way you live your life. What we're going to have to discover now is, how does that concept and explanation illuminate, change, or at least enhance and deepen our previous 4 levels of understanding of Modeh Ani? And that we're going to do to begin in the next class. Thank you for joining us. Good luck to you, and God bless.